My mom handed the $5 million business I built over 13 years to my brother. Dad looked me in the eye and said I would work under him because he had kids. I laughed, nodded, and walked out. 5 months later, they came begging, but the trap had already been sprung. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was drifting in and out of sleep when the phone buzzed. I expected it to be Genesis again, maybe asking about the supplier contracts that needed signing by Friday. Instead, it was a text from my mother. Family meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Your father and I have an important announcement. Please don't be late. I stared at the message through feverish eyes. An announcement from my parents. They didn't do announcements. They did casual phone calls on Sundays, the occasional holiday dinner, and terse acknowledgments of my accomplishments. But announcements. That word alone sent a small, uncomfortable ripple through my chest. I dragged myself upright, splashed water on my face, and swallowed down the nausea. Whatever this was, I told myself, it probably wasn't a big deal. Maybe Dad was retiring from his part-time consulting work. Maybe Mom was planning a vacation. My mind cycled through harmless possibilities as I forced myself into clean clothes and drove to my parents' house. When I walked through the front door, the dining room was already set. Mom was sitting at the head of the table, which was unusual. Dad was beside her, arms crossed, jaw set in a way I recognized from my childhood, the look he wore when he had made up his mind and wasn't interested in discussing it. My brother, Marcus, sat across from them, leaning back in his chair with a casual confidence that immediately put me on edge. "Zoe, sit down," Mom said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers were tapping the table, a nervous habit she had never managed to shake. I sat. The room was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment. I looked at Marcus. He offered me a small, almost apologetic smile, but there was something behind it, something that looked suspiciously like triumph. "Your father and I have made a decision," Mom continued. She glanced at Dad, who gave a short, confirming nod. "We've decided to transfer ownership of the business to Marcus." For a moment, the words didn't register. I heard them, understood each word individually, but they refused to assemble into meaning. I looked at her blankly. "The business," I repeated slowly. "Yes, your business. The distribution company," she said, as if clarifying which of my accomplishments she was handing away. "We've had the paperwork drawn up. Marcus will take over as owner and CEO effective immediately." The room tilted. My stomach, already fragile from the flu, lurched violently. I gripped the edge of the table. "You're giving my company to Marcus." "It's a family business, Zoe," Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "And Marcus has children. He has a family to support. It's only right that the family name carries forward." "His family," I said, my voice cracking. "Not mine. I built that company, 13 years, from nothing. From my apartment kitchen with a laptop and a phone. Every client, every contract, every single dollar of revenue, I earned it." "We know you worked hard," Mom said, and the word but hung in the air before she even spoke it. "But Marcus needs this more than you do. You're independent, you're strong, you'll figure something out." I looked at Marcus. He had the decency to look away, but only briefly. Then he met my eyes and shrugged. "I didn't ask for this, Zoe. Mom and Dad came to me. I'm just trying to do what's right for my kids." Dad leaned forward. "You'll work under him, he deserves it, he has kids." I stared at my father. I stared at my mother. I stared at my brother, who was now fidgeting with the edge of his shirt, a habit he'd had since childhood whenever he knew he was getting away with something. And then I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It wasn't sarcastic. It was a genuine, full, almost musical sound that surprised even me. It rose up from somewhere deep in my chest and filled the dining room. My parents exchanged a confused glance. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I nodded, still smiling, pushed my chair back and stood up. "Okay," I said quietly. Then I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove home. The betrayal was worse than the illness itself. The next 3 days were a blur. I called in sick to my own company, or rather, to the company that was no longer mine. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running every memory through my mind like a film reel stuck on repeat. 13 years of my life, every late night, every early morning, every meeting where I was the only woman in the room, fighting for a seat at a table I had built with my own hands. My phone rang constantly. Genesis called twice on the first day. I let it go to voicemail. She called again on the second day, and I finally picked up. "Zoe, what is going on?" Her voice was tight with concern. "I got an email from some lawyer saying there's been a change in ownership. Marcus is listed as the new CEO. Is this a joke?" I closed my eyes. "No, Genesis, it's not a joke. Your mother gave your company to your brother." "Essentially, yes." There was a long silence on the other end. Genesis had been with me for 7 years. She knew every client by name. She knew every supplier, every contract, every single process that kept the machine running. She also knew my family, or at least, she knew enough to understand what this meant. "Zoe, what are you going to do?" she asked carefully. "I don't know yet," I admitted. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "But I'm going to figure it out." That evening, I dragged myself out of bed and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold before I took a single sip. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Marcus. "Hey, can you come by the office tomorrow? We need to go over some things. I want to make sure the transition is smooth." A smooth transition, as if I were a departing employee being asked to train my replacement, as if I were a cog in a machine rather than the person who had invented the machine itself. I typed back a single word, "Sure," but as I set the phone down, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there, heavy and aching, but beneath it something else was stirring, something sharper. Something clearer. They had forgotten one crucial thing. I repeated it to myself, letting the words settle into my bones like a promise. They had forgotten one crucial thing. Let me tell you what it cost me to build that company. I was 25 when I started. I had no savings, no investors, no family backing. I had a degree in business administration that I'd earned while working 2 jobs, and I had an idea, a niche distribution model for specialty foods that connected small artisan producers with high-end restaurants and grocery chains. No one believed in it. Dad told me to get a real job. Mom suggested I apply for a position at the local school district where she had worked for 30 years. Marcus, who was 21 at the time and still living at home, laughed and called it a cute little hobby. For the first 3 years, I didn't take a single day off. I drove my own delivery van. I personally called every supplier, negotiated every contract, and built every relationship from scratch. I missed weddings. I missed birthdays. I missed the family vacations my parents planned every summer because I couldn't afford to close operations, not even for a week. When my van broke down in the middle of a delivery route in a rainstorm, I loaded the boxes into my personal car and finished the route soaking wet, shivering, and determined. By year 5, the company was profitable. By year 8, we were doing $1 million in annual revenue. By year 12, we had hit $5 million. I had a team of 15 people, a warehouse, a fleet of vehicles, and a reputation that was respected across the entire region. And through all of it, my family had never once acknowledged what I had built. Dad would mention Marcus's latest job, always something vague, something in management or consulting, with pride in his voice. Mom would talk about Marcus's children, how bright they were, how much they needed their father's support. But my company, my achievements, those were met with a polite nod and a quick change of subject. And now Marcus was the CEO. Marcus, who had never built anything in his life. Let me tell you about Marcus. My brother is the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately commands attention. He's tall, well-spoken, with an easy smile and a magnetic personality that draws people in. He has always been the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything and into anything. His resume is a patchwork of short stints at various companies, none of which he left on good terms. He spent 2 years at a marketing firm before being let go over budget concerns. He tried his hand at real estate for 18 months, but the deals seemed to always fall through. Most recently, he had been doing something he called business consulting, though no one in the family could ever quite explain what that meant. But Marcus had something I didn't have, at least in my parents' eyes. He had 2 children, Aiden, who was 6, and little Mila, who had just turned 3. His marriage to his wife, Jenna, was strained, though they kept up appearances at family gatherings. And my parents, traditional to their core, believed that the family legacy belonged with the son who could pass on the family name. What troubled me most was the way Marcus had looked at me that night in the dining room, not with guilt, not with genuine remorse, but with a quiet, practiced satisfaction, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He had always believed he deserved what I had earned, and our parents had spent decades confirming that belief, but they had all forgotten one crucial thing. They thought the company was the building, the name, the paperwork. They thought handing Marcus a title was the same as handing him a business. They didn't understand, not my parents, and certainly not Marcus, that the company wasn't the warehouse or the fleet or the letterhead. The company was me. The relationships were mine. The trust was mine. The knowledge was mine. And I could take all of it with me the moment I walked out that door. I just needed to be smart about it. The morning after my realization, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. The grief hadn't disappeared. It was still there, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone, but it had been joined by something else, something purposeful. I got out of bed, made coffee, and sat down at my laptop with a notepad beside me. I started writing. Not a journal entry, not a complaint, a strategy. First, I listed everything that made the company function. The supplier relationships, every single one of those had been built by me, face to face, over years of trust and consistency. The client contracts, most of them had personal clauses, handshake understandings, and loyalty terms that existed only because of my word. The operational knowledge, how to time the deliveries, how to manage inventory turnover, how to handle the seasonal fluctuations, none of that was written down in a manual. It lived in my head and in Genesis's head. The warehouse lease. It was in the company name, yes, but it was up for renewal in 4 months, and I was the only one who had the relationship with the property owner. The fleet financing, personally guaranteed by me. The business credit lines, tied to my personal credit score, not Marcus's. I stared at the list and felt a calm, deliberate power settling over me. They had handed Marcus a shell, a beautiful, expensive-looking shell with nothing inside. My next call was to Gloria. Gloria had been my attorney for 9 years and my friend for longer. She was sharp, methodical, and had a gift for seeing 3 moves ahead in any situation. When I told her what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Zoe, I need to ask you something," she said carefully. "When your mother transferred the ownership, did she use the original articles of incorporation?" "I assume so," I said. "Why?" "Because I drafted an amendment to those articles 8 years ago, remember? When you restructured the company after your first $1 million in revenue. There's a clause in there, a key clause, that states that any transfer of majority ownership requires written consent from the founding partner. That's you." I sat very still. I remembered the restructuring. Gloria had insisted on the clause at the time, calling it a founder's shield. I had agreed because it seemed prudent, not because I ever imagined I would need it. "Are you telling me the transfer isn't valid?" I asked. "I'm telling you it's legally contestable," Gloria said. "Very contestable. If your mother and her attorney didn't review the amended articles carefully, and most people don't when they're acting on emotion rather than due diligence, then they likely executed the transfer based on the original, unamended documents. Which means the transfer of ownership to Marcus is legally defective." I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. "There's more," Gloria continued. "Even if they try to argue the clause doesn't apply, you have years of documented evidence that you are the sole operational founder. Banking records, tax filings, client correspondence, all in your name. No court would look at that and conclude Marcus has any rightful claim to ownership." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We build the case quietly," Gloria said. "We document everything, we don't tip our hand. We let Marcus and your parents believe they've won. And when the moment is right, we drop the hammer." I thanked her, hung up, and made my second call. This one was to William, my uncle, my father's younger brother. William had been a small business owner himself for over 30 years. He ran a modest but successful hardware supply store, and he was one of the few people in my family who had ever truly understood what I had built. He had attended my company's 5-year anniversary celebration, the only family member who showed up. "Zoe," William said, his voice warm but cautious. "I heard what happened. Your father called me. He sounded proud, like he'd done something noble. He gave my company to Marcus, Uncle William." "I know, I told him he was making a mistake." He paused. "Your father doesn't listen to me much anymore, never has, but I want you to know I see what you built, and I see what they're doing. Will you support me when the time comes?" I asked. "You won't even have to ask," he said without hesitation. That afternoon, I called Genesis and asked her to come to my house. When she arrived, I told her everything: the transfer, the clause, the plan. She listened with her arms crossed, her expression shifting from disbelief to fury to determination. "Zoe, half those suppliers will drop the account the moment they realize you're not behind it," she said. "They don't work with the company, they work with you." "Exactly," I said. "And that's not sabotage, that's just reality. Let Marcus find out for himself." Genesis looked at me with a knowing smile. "So we wait." "We wait," I confirmed, "and we prepare." 3 weeks after the transfer, Marcus called me. His voice was tight, clipped, nothing like the smooth confidence he had worn at the family dinner. "Zoe, we have a problem. 2 of our biggest suppliers, Heritage Farms and Cobblestone Dairy, they're refusing to honor their contracts. They say they had agreements with you personally, not with the company. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Marcus," I said calmly. "Those relationships were built on personal trust. They've never met you. They don't know you. That's not something I can fix for you over the phone." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Well, I need you to fix it. Come in, make some calls, smooth things over. That's your job now." "My job," I repeated flatly. "Dad said you'd be working with me, under me. That was the arrangement." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Marcus, I haven't signed an employment agreement. I haven't agreed to any arrangement. Mom and Dad made a decision about ownership. They didn't make a decision about my labor." "What is that supposed to mean?" He snapped. "It means I'm under no obligation to work for you, or for anyone. I wish you the best, Marcus, I really do. But this is your company now. You figure it out." I hung up before he could respond. The next call came from my father. He was not pleased. "Zoe, your brother is struggling. You need to help him. This is family. You don't abandon family." "You gave away my company, Dad. You didn't ask me. You didn't consult me. You didn't even warn me. And now you're asking me to run it for the person you gave it to." "I'm asking you to be reasonable," he said, his voice rising. "He has children, Zoe. He has responsibilities." "And I don't." My voice cracked for the first time. "Because I chose to build something instead of having kids, my work doesn't count. My 13 years don't matter." "Nobody said that," he muttered, but the defense rang hollow. "You said it, Dad. You said he deserves it because he has kids. You looked me in the eye and told me to work under him, so let him figure it out. He deserves it, right?" I hung up. That weekend, I met Marcus at a coffee shop. He had asked for the meeting, and I agreed because I wanted to see something up close, his face when the cracks started to show. He arrived looking polished but tired. His shirt was pressed, but there were dark circles under his eyes. He ordered a black coffee and sat across from me with a folder of papers. "Zoe, I need to be straight with you," he began. "I'm losing clients. 3 restaurants dropped us this week. They said they're following you, wherever you go." "What does that even mean? You're starting something else." I leaned back and studied him. "Marcus, did you actually read the company's operating documents before you accepted the transfer?" He blinked. "What? Yeah, Mom's lawyer handled all of it." "Did you read the amended articles of incorporation, the ones from 8 years ago?" His face went blank. "Amended? I don't know what you're talking about." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. the founder's shield clause, highlighted and annotated by Gloria. Marcus picked it up and read it slowly. I watched the color drain from his face. "What does this mean?" He whispered. "It means the transfer might not be legally valid," I said quietly. "It means Mom's lawyer may have missed a critical document. And it means you might not own anything at all." Marcus looked up at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not the confident charm, not the practiced ease, real, genuine fear. "You set this up," he said, his voice trembling. "You planned this." "No, Marcus. I protected myself 8 years ago because my attorney told me it was smart business. You and Mom and Dad are the ones who tried to take something without doing your homework." He stood up abruptly, knocking his coffee cup. It spilled across the table, but he didn't seem to notice. "You're going to regret this, Zoe. I'll call my lawyer, I'll fight this." "Call whoever you want," I said, mopping up the coffee with a napkin. "But you might want to ask Mom's lawyer about that amendment first. Save yourself the billable hours." Marcus stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving the paper behind. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and put it in my bag. Over the next 6 weeks, the cracks became craters. Genesis kept me informed, not because she was spying, but because she was still inside the company, still doing her job, still watching the slow-motion collapse. Marcus had no idea how to manage inventory. He overordered on 3 major product lines, flooding the warehouse with perishable goods that spoiled before they could be moved. He underordered on the staples, causing key clients to go without their regular deliveries for the first time in the company's history. The restaurant owners who had been loyal to me for a decade started calling, not the company office, but my personal cell phone. "Zoe, what is happening?" Enzo, one of my oldest clients and a dear friend, asked during a late evening call. "My order was 2 days late, and half of it was wrong. I've never had a problem with your company in 9 years." "It's not my company anymore, Enzo," I said gently. "I don't care whose name is on the door. I care about the service, and the service is falling apart." "I know," I said. "Give it a little more time. I'm working on something." Meanwhile, Gloria was building the case methodically, brick by brick. She subpoenaed the original transfer documents and confirmed what we had suspected. The attorney had filed the transfer based on the original articles of incorporation, completely missing the amended clause. The transfer was defective on its face. She also dug into Marcus's financial background, and what she found was staggering. Marcus had outstanding personal debts totaling over $140,000. Credit cards, personal loans, 2 failed business ventures that had left creditors unpaid. He had liens against him from 2 different vendors. And yet, somehow, he had convinced my parents that he was the responsible one, the one who deserved a $5 million business. Gloria also uncovered something else. Marcus had already taken out a business line of credit against the company's assets within the first month of taking over. He had pledged the warehouse inventory and the fleet vehicles as collateral for a loan worth $200,000. The money, as far as we could tell, had not gone into the business. My parents, predictably, rallied to Marcus's defense. Mom called me one Thursday evening, her voice strained but firm. "Zoe, your brother is trying his best. He's under a lot of pressure. If you would just come back and help him." "Mom, did you know Marcus took out a loan against the company's assets?" There was a long silence. "That's not your concern anymore, Zoe." "It is if those assets are tied to my personal credit guarantee, which they are. Which means when he defaults, and he will, because he has no revenue coming in, the creditors come after me." "We'll figure it out," Mom said, but her voice wavered. "No, Mom, you won't, because you gave the company to someone who doesn't know how to run it, and you didn't even check whether the transfer was legal." "What do you mean, legal?" Her voice sharpened. "Ask your lawyer about the amended articles of incorporation, the ones from 8 years ago, the ones with the founder's consent clause." She was quiet for a long time. "Zoe, please don't do anything rash." "I haven't done anything rash, Mom. I walked out. I laughed, I nodded, and I walked out. That's what you wanted, wasn't it? Everything since then has been Marcus's doing. And yours." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my living room, letting the stillness settle around me. The case was building, the evidence was mounting, and the moment was getting closer. That weekend, I visited William at his store. He was behind the counter, organizing a shipment of bolts and screws when I walked in. He looked up, studied my face, and set down the box in his hands. "It's time, isn't it?" he said. "Almost," I told him. "I need you at the family dinner next month. I need you to see it happen. I need a witness who the family trusts." William nodded slowly. "I'll be there. And Zoe, your father isn't a bad man. He's just a stubborn one who's been listening to the wrong voice for too long." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm going to give him one last chance to hear the right one." The invitation came from my mother herself. "A family dinner," she said. "A chance to come together, to heal, to put the unpleasantness behind us." She sounded tired on the phone, more tired than I had ever heard her. I agreed to come, not because I believed in the healing, but because the timing was perfect. Gloria had filed the legal challenge 3 days earlier. The court had acknowledged the defective transfer and scheduled a preliminary hearing. Marcus had been served. My parents had been notified. The clock was ticking, and they knew it. What they didn't know was that I had also arranged for a few guests of my own. The dinner was held at my parents' house on a Saturday evening. When I arrived, the table was set beautifully, Mom's good china, the silver candlesticks she had inherited from her mother, fresh flowers in the centerpiece. It looked like a peace offering arranged on linen. Marcus was already there, seated in what had become his usual spot at the table, my father's old seat at the head. Dad sat beside him, arms crossed in that familiar, resolute posture. Mom was in the kitchen, moving between the stove and the counter with nervous energy. Nobody mentioned the legal papers. Nobody mentioned the collapsing business. Everyone smiled as if the ground beneath them wasn't crumbling. What they didn't expect was William walking through the door 5 minutes after me. "Uncle William," Dad said, his smile faltering. "We didn't know you were coming." "Zoe invited me," William said simply. He took a seat at the far end of the table and folded his hands. "I think it's time I attended a family dinner, don't you?" Mom emerged from the kitchen with a dish in her hands, saw William, and stopped. Her eyes flicked to me. I gave her a calm, steady nod. She set the dish down without a word and took her seat. Dinner began with small talk, the weather, the neighbors, Marcus's children who were with Jenna for the weekend. I ate quietly, watching, waiting. Marcus kept glancing at me between bites, his jaw tight, his fork tapping against his plate in an uneven rhythm. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. When the plates were cleared and Mom returned with coffee, I set my cup down and spoke. "I have something to say." The room went still. Mom froze with the coffee pot hovering over Dad's cup. Marcus set down his fork. Dad looked at me with narrowed eyes. "6 months ago, you gave my company to Marcus," I began, my voice steady and clear. "You did it without asking me. You did it without checking the legal documents. And you did it because you believed Marcus deserved it more than I did because he has children." "Zoe," Dad started, "please let me finish." I held up a hand. "Since that night, Marcus has lost 4 of our top 10 clients. He has overstocked the warehouse with $100,000 worth of spoiled inventory. He has taken out a $200,000 loan against company assets, money that never went into the business. And he has driven the company to the edge of bankruptcy in less than 5 months." Marcus's face burned red. "That's not." "Heritage Farms dropped us," I continued, ignoring him. "Cobblestone Dairy dropped us. Enzo's Restaurant, my client of 9 years, nearly went a week without produce. Genesis has been keeping the lights on practically single-handedly, while Marcus has been using the company as his personal bank account." "Zoe, enough." Dad's voice boomed across the table. "This is a family dinner, not a courtroom." "You're right, Dad. It's not a courtroom. The courtroom comes next week." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were the documents Gloria had prepared, the amended articles of incorporation, the founder's consent clause, the evidence of Marcus's debts, the loan documents, the supplier termination letters. I set them on the table one by one, each page landing with a soft, definitive sound. "The transfer of ownership was never legally valid," I said. Mom's lawyer missed a critical amendment that requires my written consent for any transfer of majority ownership. I never gave that consent. Which means Marcus has never legally owned the company. Every decision he's made, every loan he's taken out, every asset he's pledged, all of it was done under a defective title. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Dad stared at the papers, his face ashen. Marcus sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the documents as if they might disappear if he didn't blink. "I didn't sabotage the company," I said softly. "I walked away. The company fell apart because Marcus doesn't know how to run it. Not because I made it fail, but because I was the one keeping it alive and you took me out of it." I looked at my father. "You told me to work under him. You told me he deserved it because he has kids. I don't have kids, so my work doesn't count. Is that still what you believe, Dad? Look at those papers. Look at what he's done in 5 months. And tell me he deserved it." The silence that followed was the heaviest sound I had ever heard in that house. Dad stared at the documents. His jaw worked, opening and closing, as if the words he had relied on for so long had suddenly stopped working. Mom's eyes were glassy with tears she was fighting to hold back. Then William spoke. His voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the stillness like a blade. "I told you this was a mistake, Roberto. I told you years ago that girl had built something special, and you laughed at me. You said family comes first. Well, family is sitting right here at this table, and you gave her away like she meant nothing." Dad's chin dropped to his chest. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing. Then he reached across the table and pushed the papers back toward me. "Fix it," he whispered. "Please, Zoe, fix it." Mom broke then. The tears came, rolling down her cheeks in silence. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, Zoe. I thought I was doing the right thing for the family. I thought." "I know what you thought, Mom," I said gently, "but you need to hear what you did." Marcus pushed his chair back and stood. He looked around the table at his parents, at his uncle, at me, and for the first time in his life, he had no charm left to deploy. No easy smile, no clever deflection. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That depends," I said, "on whether you're willing to accept the consequences of what you've done." The courtroom was small, wooden-paneled, and quiet. Gloria stood beside me, her briefcase organized with the precision of a surgeon's tray. Marcus sat on the other side with a public defender his mother had hired, the same attorney who had botched the transfer in the first place. My parents sat in the first row behind me, holding hands, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. The judge reviewed the documents, asked questions, and listened to arguments from both sides. Gloria was methodical, walking through each piece of evidence with the calm authority of someone who knew the outcome before she entered the room. The amended articles were clear. The founder's consent clause was unambiguous. The transfer had been executed without the required written approval. The court ruled in my favor within 45 minutes. The ownership of the company was restored to me, effective immediately. The loan Marcus had taken out was his personal liability, not the company's. Gloria had made sure of that by demonstrating the defective title under which it had been issued. Marcus was left with the debt, the liens, and the uncomfortable reality of facing creditors he could no longer outrun. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's world continued to shrink. The creditors came calling. Jenna filed for separation, citing his financial recklessness and the stress it had placed on their family. He moved out of their house and into a small apartment on the edge of town. The children stayed with Jenna during the week, and Marcus saw them on weekends, quiet, strained visits that I knew pained him deeply. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate his suffering. I simply watched from a distance and felt the heavy sadness of it all, because despite everything, he was still my brother, and I had never wanted him to fall. I had only wanted what was mine. Rebuilding the company took work, but not as much as starting it had. The moment the word spread that I was back, the suppliers returned. Heritage Farms called on a Tuesday. Cobblestone Dairy on a Wednesday. Enzo sent a message that simply read, "Welcome home. My order is in the system." Genesis, who had held the operation together with sheer willpower and loyalty, met me at the warehouse door with a clipboard in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "About time," she said with a grin. I walked through the warehouse that morning, running my fingers along the shelving units, breathing in the familiar scent of fresh produce and cardboard and cold storage. The team was smaller now. Some had left during Marcus's tenure, unable to tolerate the chaos, but the ones who remained looked at me with a relief that was humbling. Gloria helped me restructure the company with ironclad protections, new articles of incorporation, new operating agreements, every clause reviewed, every loophole closed. No transfer, no assignment, no change of ownership could ever happen again without my explicit, notarized, legally bulletproof consent. My father came to see me 3 weeks after the ruling. He arrived at the warehouse alone, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had aged 5 years in 5 months. He stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. "Zoe," he said, "I don't deserve to ask you this, but I'm asking anyway." I set down my pen and looked at him. "Can you forgive me?" I studied his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the tremor in his jaw, the way his shoulders curved inward under the weight of what he had done. This was not the stubborn, resolute man who had told me to work under my brother. This was a father who had been broken by his own mistake. "Dad," I said slowly, "I forgive you, but I need you to understand something. I built this with my own hands, every single piece of it. And for you to look at me, and decide it belonged to someone else because I don't have children. That broke something in me, not the business, me." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life being sorry for it." "I don't need you to be sorry forever," I said. "I need you to see me, not as your son's sister, not as someone who doesn't have kids, as your daughter who made you proud, even when you didn't notice." "I see you now," he whispered. "I see you now." Mom came the following weekend. She didn't come to the warehouse. She came to my home with a dish of her homemade lasagna, the one she used to make for my birthday every year before the business consumed my life. She set it on the counter, turned to me, and wrapped her arms around me so tightly that I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. "I'm sorry," she said into my shoulder. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I held her and let the words settle, not erasing the pain, not undoing the betrayal, but softening its edges the way time softens everything if you let it. William called that Sunday. "How are you?" he asked. "Peaceful," I said, and I meant it. The company recovered. Within 4 months, we were back to full revenue. Within 6, we had surpassed our previous records. Genesis was promoted to Chief Operating Officer with a stake in the business, because I had learned that loyalty should be rewarded with more than gratitude. Gloria remained on retainer, reviewing every document that crossed my desk with her trademark precision. As for Marcus, I heard through the family grapevine that he had taken a job at a friend's car dealership. Steady work, honest hours, no glamour. I didn't reach out, not then. But I sent a gift for Aiden's 7th birthday through my parents, and I signed the card from Aunt Zoe. Because he was a child, and he had never asked for any of this. And because despite everything, I still believed in family, just not at the expense of everything I had built. I stood in the warehouse one evening, long after everyone had gone home, and looked around at the shelves, the forklift, the cold storage units humming quietly in the dark. 13 years, lost and reclaimed, broken and rebuilt. Mine.